The Clay Marble, Chapter 4. The very next evening, when my family and Jontus were gathered around the cooking fire for our dinner, the topic of the food distribution came up. As the grown-ups talked about it, I held Jontu's baby brother in my lap and listened quietly. Every 2 weeks or so, Nia said, a convoy of massive trucks arrived at Nong Chan, bringing basic food supplies such as rice, cooking oil, and salted fish. Until you get your rations, my family can share ours with you, she said. That's what happens all over the camp. The families who arrived earlier sharing with those who come after them. It all works out in the end. But how do we get our rations? Sarun asked. Well, a few days before the trucks are due, word generally spreads about, let me re-say that. Well, a few days before the trucks are due, word generally spreads around the whole camp that there will be a distribution soon. Then, as head of your family, you'll have to join up with a team of other refugee families. Each team then gets registered with the relief officials, Nia said. I think there's due to be another distribution in about 5 or 6 days. You should join up with the team now so you can register for that distribution. It all sounded rather complicated to me. Could we join your team? I asked shyly. Nia laughed. Ha! It was a soft, melodious sound like the faint tinkling of temple bells in the breeze. Why not? She said. It feels as if we're already part of the same family, doesn't it? I nodded happily. Yes, that was exactly how it felt. Just living next to each other these last couple of days, sharing meals and chores and stories, our families, I felt, had grown very close. Impulsively, I held the baby up and hugged him. He felt heavy and solid. He squirmed and wriggled loose. Only then did I notice the warm, dark stain on my sarong where he had wet it. Laughing, I handed him back to Jontu. Just as Nia had said, we soon heard that a convoy of trucks was due to arrive at Nong Chan by the end of the week. Sarun joined Grandpa Kim's team and, along with the other men in their team, walked the 2 miles from the fringe of the refugee camp, where we were living, to the other edge, where the long thatched shelters of the camp headquarters had been built. There they registered their team with the relief officials and were told to return in 2 days. At dawn on the appointed day, when Sarun and Grandpa Kim hitched up one of the ox carts, I begged to be allowed to go along too. Much to my surprise, they agreed to take me. Our team drove through the sprawling outskirts of Nong Chan on 6 ox carts. I sat wedged between Sarun and Grandpa Kim on our cart. Craning my neck to see around, I began to understand how large the refugee camp was. I had heard the grown-ups estimate that there were at least 40,000 people here, but I had no sense of what that meant. Now I could see how the massive waves of refugees like ourselves had turned the flat, abandoned fields of Nong Chan into a teeming camp of thatched tents and plastic shelters that stretched out toward the horizon. If I were a tadpole weaving my way through a big, flooded seedbed, I thought, and each rice seedling were a refugee family, that might be about how big this camp is. Finally, we came to the heart of Nong Chan, under tall bamboo watchtowers. We parked our ox carts in a sandy lot packed with thousands of other people in their carts. All that morning we waited. It was hot and dry and there wasn't a spot of shade anywhere, but nobody complained. At about noon, I saw a huge cloud of dust on the horizon. Soon a line of trucks roared down the dirt road that linked Nong Chan to the Thai town of Aranyaparathet. 30 miles away, the trucks ground to a halt in front of the entrance of the refugee camp, where the dirt road ended. 53 trucks, Sarun said, his voice awed. Now what? The tailgate of each truck swung down, and immediately groups of men with yellow armbands started unloading the sacks of rice, swinging and tossing the heavy gunny sacks from man to man with a swift, rhythmic motion. As the rice was being unloaded and stacked into huge piles twice my height, officials with red armbands ushered the first registered team of men into corrals where sacks of rice had already been placed. Team by team, the men rushed in, hauled away the sacks allotted to them, and quickly left to make room for the next team. I watched, awed by the almost clockwork precision of it all. There were thousands of men waiting before our turn came, but the distribution went so quickly and smoothly that we didn't have to wait long at all. When it was our turn and the bamboo gate of the corral was flung open to it, when it was our turn and the bamboo gate of the corral was flung open to us, I climbed up and sat on the fence as the men on our team charged right through. I watched Grandpa Kim and Sarun carry a sack between them, staggering slightly under its weight. As soon as they reached the ox cart, they swung the sack up over into the cart, then immediately went back for more. With the other men working as quickly and precisely, soon all other teams' ox carts were fully loaded. Gasping for breath, Sarun wiped the sweat from his forehead with his checkered scarf as he eyed the filled ox carts. "Now, let's go show the women what we've got," he said. As if he were heading a triumphal procession, he drove the team's first ox cart back through Nong Chan as the others rumbled behind. As we approached our campsite, I saw Jontu jump up from the hammock and heard her shout, "They're back!" In a flash, Nia and Mother and a dozen other women dashed out of their shelters, craning their necks toward us. Sarun sat up, tall and straight next to Grandpa Kim and me. He was trying to look dignified, but when he saw Mother running up to greet him, he broke into a wide smile. "Look, in the cart," he told her gleefully, reining the oxen to a stop. Inside our cart were large, bulging gunny sacks, stacked neatly on top of one another. "Rice," Mother said softly. "Yes, and something else too," he said. His eyes searched the crowd until he found Nia. She was standing a little apart from the crowd, her face framed by a bright scarf. Looking straight at her, he pointed at the gunny sack next to him. "Something special," he said to Nia. "Look." "Fragrant rice?" Nia asked, making her way toward our cart for a look. "Even better than that," he said, waiting for her to come closer. It was only when she got within a few steps of us that she made out the words stenciled in green on the sack. "Rice seed," she read out loud and looked up at Sarun with shining eyes. "A special rice seed," Sarun said. "We were told by the officials that it has been treated against insects and mildew, so that almost each grain should germinate, and it's of a fragrant, high-yielding variety of rice, too." Nia looked impressed. Stepping up to the cart, she touched the sack of rice seed and said, "You have so much of it. 3 sacks. 4, Sarun said proudly, and we were also told that at the next distribution there would be hoe heads and fish nets as well. He jumped down from the cart and stood smiling beside her. "We can really plan ahead now for the next planting season." Nia looked up at him, then demurely lowered her eyes. Her voice was soft when she spoke. "You'll need help planting all that rice seed," she said. I hope to find some help sowing and transplanting it, Sarun answered. I had never heard his voice so gentle before. I jumped off the cart and edged toward them, not wanting to miss a word. Your mother and sister can help, Nia was saying. My mother is getting old, and my sister is still young, Sarun answered. You'll have friends from your village who'll be glad to help, Nia said. Strong friends. Pretty ones, too. I think I have a friend right here, Sarun said, who's stronger and much prettier than anyone back home. Listening to them, I was reminded of the village folk dances at harvest time, when the pairs of young men and women would dance the ramwong, slowly circling each other, their fingertips sometimes touching. It's a good village, Sarun was saying, his voice soft and warm. At the edge of the Tonzab Lake, where the soil is black and moist, our harvests are good, and there's plenty of fish fresh from the lake. He paused and smiled at Nia. You'd like it there, he said. Nia started to walk away. How can you be so sure that I'd like it there? She said, looking over her shoulder at my brother. There's only one way to find out, Sarun said, walking after her. Come with me when you go home. I started to follow them, but suddenly felt a sharp tug at my arm. Jantu stood beside me, trying to pull me away. I resisted, but she was stronger and managed to drag me with her. But I wanted to listen to them, I said angrily when we were some distance from Sarun and Nia. I know, Jantu snapped, still gripping my arm, but anybody could tell they wanted to be alone. Your mother moved off, didn't she? So did Grandpa Kim. I hadn't noticed, but now that Jantu mentioned it, I saw that my mother had quietly retreated to her own thatched lean-to, and Grandpa Kim was talking to the other men. I frowned. But why? I asked. Jantu gave me an impatient look. Why else do you think a man and a woman might want to talk alone? She asked. Sarun and Nia were strolling away from the ox cart, still deep in conversation. Nia's face glowed with a kind of bashful admiration, while Sarun gestured eagerly as he talked. They looked as if they were in a world of their own. A startling new thought occurred to me. You mean they're going to get married? I blurted out. Jantu grinned. Who knows? The monsoons won't start for weeks yet, and we have to go home to plant the rice crop, she said. A lot could happen before then. I looked at the ox cart Sarun had driven back. The other team members were now dividing the sacks of rice and systematically carrying them off into the shelters of the various families. Soon we would be heading home with the farm tools, new fish nets, and rice seeds to start a new crop. A new life. I felt a quiver of anticipation and joy, so strange to me that it was a while before I recognized it for what it was, a sense of hope.